Good evening. Bonsoir à tous. My name is Eddy Kara, and I am the NDP Pierrefonds-Dollard president and your moderator for the evening. Tonight with us, we have Anthony de Luca-Baratta, who's our VP External in Pierrefonds-Dollard and who's leaning to vote for Jamie Nicholls. Then we have Patrick Quinn, who's leaning to vote for Eddy Kara. And then we have Jamie Nicholls on behalf of the Charlie Angus campaign, who's the former MP of Vaudreuil-Soulanges. The format for tonight is very simple. Everyone will be asked a question and they will have up to 30 seconds to respond each. This response phase will be followed by a 3-minute open debate. I'd like to remind everyone that all the campaigns were sent emails to confirm their representatives, and that the Ashland campaign is the one that did not send one. If you want more information about Nikki Ashland, you can visit her website. And tonight we're also going to discuss her policies as well. The debate will mostly be in English, avec 3 questions en français. Les applaudissements sont permis dans une mesure raisonnable. Pendant ce débat, on va avoir 2 pauses de 10 minutes chaque. I, as your moderator, will reserve the right to intervene if further clarification is needed. And throughout this process, we have invited everyone to submit their questions, so we will read them out as well. So without further ado, let's begin our debate. All right, so the first question comes from our first topic for tonight, leadership and electability. According to Bacchus data, only 17% of Canadians intend on voting for the NDP, while that number is for the Liberals 43%. Provincially, the highest voter intention for our party lies in the provinces of Quebec, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan at 21%, with the Liberals leading at their highest in Ontario with 51%. And of course, the Conservatives in Alberta with 63%. Similarly, the data gathered by Nanos Research shows that 55% of Canadians would still consider the Liberals as their first choice should an election be held today, while only 38% would consider voting for the NDP and 49% would not consider it. How does your candidate wish to remedy this? And let's begin with Jamie.
Well, I think this highlights the point that we need a leader in the House right now. I lived through losing our leader in 2011 and going through a period of having an interim leader. We really need a leader that's going to be there to speak to the issues in the House and bring them up every day. When we were in the interim period, we were sort of lost in a sense that, we went through a leadership campaign, and when Tom Mulcair came on board, he actually started to dismantle the Harper government. We need someone in the House right now to start to dismantle the Liberal government and to highlight the places where the Liberal government are failing Canadians. And so the Angus campaign is ready to do that from day one.
All right. So, next up, Patrick.
Well, Guy Caron is someone who understands that to win, to have a path to victory in 2019, it comes through Quebec. And Guy has outlined a plan on his website. He has a whole section dedicated to that, but basically he wants to put 10 dedicated organizers on the ground for Quebec. He wants to target 60 ridings. Did you know that 32 ridings in the last election, we came in second place? We have a chance in Quebec, and it starts there.
All right, and now we have
So the first thing that I want to highlight is that in 2015, Canada proved that it was ready to be receptive to progressive ideas. Unfortunately, Canadians picked Justin Trudeau as that leader. Our goal going forward as the NDP really should be to have a leader who can sell our progressive ideas, our real progressive ideas. And Jamie pointed out that we needed someone in the House. I would like to point out that Tom Mulcair himself was a good House leader, but was ineffective on the campaign trail. Jagmeet Singh has already signed up 47,000 new members. He's proved that he's able to get people excited about our party, and that's where the NDP forming government in 2019 will come from.
Thank you. And now, Applause break number 3. All right. So now let's begin our first open debate phase. So 3 minutes are on the clock. So let's begin.
I think I'll go
Let's
first.
start
and
with you
just
then, Jamie.
answering Anthony's point. Campaign and governance are two things. Housework and campaign are two things, entirely separate things. And I see that point that you're making. But the fact is that, Tom Mulcair did do the work to dismantle the Harper government, to tell Canadians where the Harper government was failing, to the point that it became not whether the Harper government was going to leave, but who was going to replace him. Now, Charlie, I speak for his campaign because I find that out of the 4 candidates, I worked with 3 of the 4, and for me, Charlie remains the most authentic, the one who actually can talk to Canadians, the one who actually pierces through that Ottawa bubble and can get to get to really speak with Canadians and to feel like you're being listened to. I haven't really seen that from the other campaigns, and I think that's what Charlie brings to the table, is that this authenticity, that people are searching for someone who's not a classical politician and someone who can speak to the needs and the desires of everyday Canadians.
Anthony?
Yeah, I appreciate your point, Jamie, and I guess the position that I'm coming from is that if the NDP wants to form government in 2019, we do need to bring new members on board. The NDP right now has about 120,000 members, which is a very respectable number for a third party. A third of those were brought on by Jagmeet Singh. After the leadership race is done, we will have strong leaders in the House, and I respect the work that Charlie has done in the House, especially on Indigenous issues. Nathan Cullen will be in the House. Hélène Laverdière is a very strong MP from Quebec. We will have that House leadership to hold Trudeau to account. We need someone on the ground who's actually able to speak to people and bring new people on board. The reality is that politics is about perception, and the fact that Jagmeet has brought on 47,000 new members proves to me that he's able to get that done. So,
Patrick?
I would actually say that we should also be giving the ideas to the Canadian population. We should be talking about basic income. We should be talking about what we're going to be dealing with in the next 5-10 years with automation. We need to deal with the fact of climate change. We need to be talking about the economy. That is the main issue. That's what Canadians want to hear, and that's what Guy Caron cares about. It's about helping Canadians, lifting vulnerable Canadians out of poverty.
Thank you. Which brings us to our next question. A majority of party members are calling for dire reforms in our party, such as calls to consult members more and even to modernize our current methods. It is expected for the future party leader to lead that charge to make those wanted reforms implemented. Similarly, our PM promised many changes to occur within his own party since 2013, yet we are still waiting to see those changes. How do leadership candidates wish to accomplish this feat? And we'll start with Anthony.
I was there at the 2017 Quebec Terrebonne convention with you, Eddy, and one of the things that was really front and center of the agenda was how do we get Canadians' voices, specifically New Democratic members' voices, heard. And to be honest, I think that all the campaigns have had a really strong ground game. I keep going back to this 47,000 number because I think it's important. I think that in 2015, Prime Minister Trudeau spoke to people. They believed him. They came on board. He ran a successful campaign and he won government. This is what we need in our next leader. And I just think that Jagmeet Singh has proven that these are the kinds of things that he's good at. I've spoken to him personally. He's a good listener, and that's what we need.
Patrick.
To get the people to in our party to listen, we need to we need to work with the party. We need to get the organizers to work within the party, with the MPs, with the riding executives, with the party members. We need these organizers on the ground game, specifically in Quebec. As I was saying earlier, we can have 10 dedicated organizers on the ground, helping, especially in 60 ridings that we've identified, as key points to work in, we can be doing that, and that's the main thing we should be doing.
Thank you. Jamie?
Well, Charlie Angus has been a member of Parliament since 2004. He knows the machinery of the party in Ottawa, and it's for that reason that grassroots organizers across the country are supporting the Angus campaign, because they know that Charlie knows the changes that have to be made. I see that as a weakness of perhaps some of the other candidates as not being there as long. And certainly the number of memberships inflates during a leadership campaign. The important piece is, can you engage those members once they're signed up and keep their engagement going? And I see Charlie Angus as the person to do that.
Thank you. Now let's begin our 3-minute round of an open debate. So we'll start with Patrick.
So, Jamie, as you were just talking about the grassroots, how is he going to do that? Charlie's been notoriously vague on his website about party, so how is he going to listen to people? That's the main question.
Well, the fact is that Charlie's going to reach out to grassroots organizers that are already working on the ground, that were demoralized by the direction that the party took under Mulcair's leadership, that felt that they were sort of pushed out of their say in their party, and he's going to bring those people back on board and listen to them. He'll find the mechanisms to do that, I'm sure. That's one of his main priorities, is to get those grassroots voices back, to get strong riding associations that are able to have a two-way dialogue with the leadership.
Anthony?
Yeah, I mean, we've heard. Look, I mean, I'm in violent agreement, as Nathan Collin would say, with my colleagues. You know, you pointed out, Patrick, that the road to victory leads through Quebec. I agree with that. The road to victory also goes through the Greater Toronto Area. You know, we could have debates all day about which candidate is stronger in which area. It's a fact that Nikki Ashton is, you know, strong in Montreal. I think the question is, how do your candidates propose to excite people? Because I think that what Jagmeet has done is excite people. That being said, I do respect the very strong ground games that both of the candidates that you're leaning to have done, but I would like to know, how do you think that they're going to excite people?
Well, I think Charlie's going to make a strong argument to be an NDP Prime Minister. I mean, we've already tried to be flashy and tried to emulate the Liberals. It didn't work. It failed spectacularly in 2015. And so what we have to do is we have to embrace our values and be proud of the fact that we're social democrats and we have a vision for this country. And Charlie Angus is unabashedly a social democrat who's willing to stand up for the people who don't have a voice currently in Ottawa. So we've already tried to be flashy. We've already tried to emulate the Liberals. Let's not go down the same road another time.
All right, well said. Here's our next question. We've heard about electoral reform during every single election in modern times, yet nothing actually happens. Yet in the last federal election, we noticed the highest voter turnout in a long time, particularly with the youth vote, rising from 39% according to StatCan to 57%. Nikki Ashton, one of the leadership candidates running in our race, also said that the next biggest voting bloc will be the millennials themselves. So throughout this leadership race, we've consistently heard about electoral reform. However, there's disagreement on the how. So how should our elections be reformed? And let's start with Patrick.
Under a Guy Caron government, we will be implementing mixed member proportional government. So we'll be doing that, and it will happen for 2 election cycles, and then we'll be going back to the people for approval to continue with the cycle. We will be implementing it first, and then if it's not working, we can always go back to first past the post, but I'm sure that everybody will be in violent agreement here that we all want electoral reform.
Jamie?
Well, Charlie supports evidence-based policy, and definitely the committee, the standing committee in Ottawa, and all experts were behind the idea of having a mixed member proportional system to reform our system, and Charlie Angus backs that fully.
Thank you. And now Anthony?
Yeah, one of the reasons that I think people voted for the Liberals last election was because they wanted a more proportional form of elections, and the Prime Minister, that doesn't surprise me, has broken that promise. And I think that all the candidates are once again in agreement. Jagmeet Singh has also proposed a mixed member proportional representation, just like they have all over Europe. And I think that that's the way to go forward.
A follow-up question over here, if you may. How is proportional representation actually going to work as a winning strategy for the NDP? Anthony.
Well, I think that one of the strengths of the NDP over time has definitely been, in the areas that we've won, of course, has been the fact that people really feel connected to their local MP. That's something that we do well, and the mixed member proportional representation will conserve that.
Okay.
Because there will be ridings in which there will be local elections. This is what they do in Germany and other places in Europe. The proportional aspect will give the NDP, will also advantage the NDP, not that that's the goal, but it will, because if you have a spread out vote across the country, but the percentage is lower than in other parties, then what often happens is that because that vote is spread out, we don't actually win seats. And so and the Green Party has said the same thing, and other minor parties. So if you do have that aspect of proportional representation, I believe that will also increase our seat count.
Would anyone else like to jump in?
Well, I think that's a fair point that Anthony brings up, is that, NDP members do get out there and they knock on doors, not just during elections, they do it at all times to consult with their citizens and meet with them. And definitely the fact that you can vote for your local candidate and you can vote for a different party. For some NDP members across the country, or potential members, that would be an ideal situation where they could vote for a party and then vote for the MP as well, and have both of their views, a greater amount of their views represented in the makeup of Canada's Parliament.
Patrick, why is Guy Caron's plan better?
Well, on the other hand, with all the candidates, he has also said that in a coalition government, in the instance that we are the third party and we hold the balance of power, that will be a non-compromise, just like the Green Party of British Columbia has done out in BC. He will make it only that, like, there's no compromise on that. If there's no election reform, he won't be backing the party, whether it be the Conservatives or the Liberals, but obviously in 2019 we'll be winning.
Awesome. Way to go. That was a great debate, wasn't it? Yeah. All right, let's keep the energy up with our next question about progressivism. Progressivism is the biggest buzzword used in our race. Many Liberal supporters also believe that they are progressives themselves. Another buzzword, or a set of buzzwords rather, was, or are, middle-class politics. So according to the National Post, the Liberals speak constantly of strengthening the Canadian middle class, but any precise definition of that amorphous category of people getting all that attention has always been very ambiguous. Even our Minister of Transport recently said, I quote, "The Government of Canada defines the middle class using a broad set of characteristics which includes values, lifestyle, and income." So here's the question. What differentiates the NDP in terms of progressive and middle-class policies? And let's begin with Patrick.
What differentiates the NDP from other parties is, one, we have always been the party of Labour. We have Labour connections out in all the provinces. For example, in Manitoba, their party is very connected with the Labour movement there. For example, the Manitoba Federation of Labour, the United Steelworkers out there. But for example, Guy Caron, he is very much connected to the Labour movement, and that's the true middle class, the Labour movement, and that's what we're connected to.
Okay. Next up, we have Anthony.
Well, I think that Patrick makes a good point about Labour, but I think that progressivism is more than just Labour. Progressivism, to me, means putting the interests of ordinary people first. What does that mean? That means that Indigenous child poverty is an issue. When you have people in northern Indigenous reserves in Ontario as young as 12 years old committing suicide, it is progressive to care about those people. When we know as a fact that climate change affects the poor first, as we saw with the natural disasters in the Caribbean and in the south of the United States, caring about climate change is progressive. When it comes to the interests of workers, as Patrick mentioned, having those interests at heart are progressive, and the NDP has proven countless times that we stand for those policies.
Okay, and finally, Jamie?
Well, I think that as a party, we speak for those who have no voice. Charlie was speaking about Indigenous issues long before sort of the media picked up on those through his work with Shannon's Dream, Shannon Kustashian. But the history of our party shows that we've always spoke up for those who have no voice or who are intimidated from speaking, pacifists during times of war, the new working class nowadays, the people who are in precarious employment. And we're the only party that will call out deadbeat corporations. When David Lewis called the corporate class corporate welfare bums, we are the only party that sort of points out that these corporations are not benefiting average Canadians in all cases. And if they're deadbeat corporations, we call them out on their bad corporate practices.
Thank you. Now, as we progress, like progressives, let's start with the open debate. So let's begin with Patrick.
I have a question for you, Anthony. How is it progressive to have a propose means-tested old age security? How is that progressive?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's something that has been worrying the other campaigns and lots of Canadians. The fact is, and this has been pointed out numerous times, social programs to the elderly are already means-tested. When Joey Saputo retires, he will not be getting government benefits, as he shouldn't. If you guys think that he should, then this is an area where we do disagree. And the fact that Jagmeet Singh has constantly advocated for the interests of the elderly, he has brought this forward. I have the utmost confidence that the means test that is put in place will be absolutely fair.
Okay. Would anyone else like to jump in?
Well, I would just ask, where would the cutoff line be? And how isn't that kind of a slippery slope to go down, that all of a sudden if we advocate means testing for one thing, maybe other areas that are universal now, universal programs, that the other two parties will say, well, you've advocated for means testing for this one thing, so why not do it for these things?
Right, and the slippery slope argument could be used with anything. If we argue for public ownership of natural resources, as some of us have, why not advocate for public ownership of Tim Hortons or the clothing industry? I mean, you can't just use that argument willy-nilly. I think the fact is that the conversation around means testing has centered on old age security. It has not moved to the other areas. Now, if the Liberals or Conservatives start advocating for means testing in other areas, as Prime Minister Mulroney tried to do in the 80s, the NDP will stand up to that, as we have historically.
All right. Let's progress to the next question. According to Nanos research, 66% of Canadians believe that Justin Trudeau has good leadership qualities, while 26% do not. Similarly, 40% are unsure about Andrew Scheer, with 35% stating that he has good leadership qualities. In your view, what are 3 good leadership qualities and why? And let's start with Anthony.
I think the fact that Jagmeet excites voters, as I've mentioned before. I think his energy is important, and I think his vigorous belief in progressive policies, along with his ability to make other people believe in those progressive policies as well.
Okay. Jamie?
Well, I think I've mentioned it before that Charlie Angus's authenticity, the fact that he can reach your average Canadians is an important thing, but also his honesty and his determination. The fact that I witnessed many times Charlie standing up in the House and he would actually rattle the government. They would start heckling at him as soon as he got up because they knew what he was speaking was the truth. And he was getting through and he was touching a sore point. And so I think that Charlie is a true leader. I've seen him in action in the House. He's an author of 7 books. He's a dedicated activist that will bring Canada forward.
Okay. And Patrick?
Guy Caron is a bridge builder. In his speech in Hamilton, He rarely used I. He talked about the power of we. This guy's a bridge builder. He listens to people. He will respectively disagree with people, but he doesn't think people's opinions are wrong. He listens, and that's what a leader is. Somebody who listens to their constituents, somebody who builds bridges in the party, and somebody who believes in the power of we. That's what matters.
Okay. So let's move on to our 3-minute open debate, unless no one wants to.
I think that about sums it up.
Okay. So on to the next question. In terms of building bridges, let's. Qui est votre premier ministre canadien préféré? Et on va commencer cette question avec Patrick.
Pour moi, je n'ai pas comme vraiment vécu quelqu'un qui est premier ministre. J'ai 20 ans. Mais je dirais Paul Martin à cause que il était vraiment gentil quand j'étais petit. Et aussi, je pense que dans les années comme Wilfrid Laurier est un genre qui était un bon premier ministre.
Okay, merci. Anthony?
Donc, moi, je dois dire le premier ministre Lester B. Pearson. C'est sous le gouvernement minoritaire de Lester B. Pearson que nous avons obtenu notre système public de soins de santé, le système de pension publique. Il a aussi créé des commissions pour examiner l'état des langues, des 2 langues officielles du Canada, ce qui est important au Québec. Et aussi, il y a aussi commandé une commission sur les droits des femmes. Bien sûr, c'était sous l'influence de Tommy Douglas, le premier leader du NPD. Donc, pour moi, c'est ça.
Jamie?
Moi, il faut que je dise que mon premier ministre préféré, c'était le premier ministre de Saskatchewan, pas du Canada, Tommy Douglas, à cause de ses capacités d'avancer le mouvement progressiste au Canada. C'est certain que c'est probablement le meilleur premier ministre du Canada qu'on n'a pas eu la chance à voir. Mais je trouve que sur tous les enjeux, Tommy était le meilleur. Puis c'est dommage que les Canadiens n'ont pas partagé cet avis, mais on voit avec les décennies que quand on regarde l'histoire, on dit que peut-être Tommy Douglas aura été le meilleur.
Excellent. All right. So now we move on to our second debate topic, which is arts. This question comes from Ken from Papineau. In 2016, there were 69 Canadian films that were released. Telefilm Canada was promised to receive $22 million more last year over 5 years, while the National Film Board, $13.5 million over 5 years. Now, Telefilm only finances 110 feature films per year. What should be done to promote Canadian films and to provide a better plan to enhance the Canadian film industry? And with that question, we'll begin with Jamie.
Well, I think Charlie Angus, this is sort of his forte. His file is the arts. As a musician, as a performer, and an artist, he has the best understanding of all 4 candidates. He lives it. He knows the issues. So he's been talking about more funding for arts councils and artists, more funding for touring grants, and just generally more funding for culture, because Charlie's aware of how important culture is in terms of our economy. It's 8% of our GDP. It's very important to him.
Patrick?
The main issue with artists is especially with the fact that they're not making a living wage, and with his basic income, that would actually be helping these artists out. They would be able to be making their films more easily with the basic income, with having money to spend, rather than being forced to work precariously. He also supports, obviously, the Quebec culture. That's what he would be doing. Yeah.
Okay, Anthony.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's unfortunate that Jigme does not put forward a policy on the arts yet, and I'll readily admit that I don't speak for his campaign. And I'm really happy to hear that Guy Caron is discussing living wage, and I hope we could have a discussion about it in the future. I should point out that Jagmeet does have a policy of wage subsidies for low-wage workers, and I hope he could be persuaded to expand that. But I'm glad for the work that Guy and Charlie have done.
Okay, now let's follow up while we move into our debate phase. Just to recap, the question was about telefilm and Canadian filmmakers and artists themselves. So let's try to actually talk about our films being produced in Canada. I just want to elaborate, as a filmmaker myself, most American companies do come to Vancouver and Toronto to produce their films. And they do hire Canadian extras, but we don't have much like Hollywood being produced locally. So what do you think should be done? Let's begin with Jamie once again.
Well, I think, Charlie, I've spoken with him about minority language cultural funding, and certainly in Quebec, Anglophones are a minority, and we do have a strong film industry here. I would sort of take issue that we don't have Hollywood films here. I can name, 6 or 7 that have already been filming in Montreal this year. But what Charlie will do is that he's going to look at minority language funding and increase that for cultural enterprises. He's going to make sure that the different voices, the strong voices of the diversity of Canada are expressed in film, in music, in literature. That's what he's aiming for.
Okay, Patrick?
I would like to also say that Charlie's dedication and commitment to the art scene is something that I really appreciate. He doesn't have a specific arts platform, but all I can say is that he definitely respects the minority rights. He respects that all that, but he also understands that, like a lot of artists, filmmakers, especially filmmakers, they're not making the living wage that they should be, and it would be really helpful if we had the basic income so it would help to stimulate the filmmakers in creating films.
Okay, Anthony, want to add something?
In terms of minority languages and rights, Jagmeet has promised to increase the ability, the autonomy of Indigenous communities to protect their language rights on reserve in their schools, which I think is very important. And Jagmeet Singh says the story on the campaign trail all the time. He decided to learn French as a teenager because he identified with the Francophone minority in Quebec, and I think that's as a minority, visibly Sikh man himself. And so I think that's encouraging. In terms of film, I wish that he would have put out something on it, but I can't make it up. So, hopefully it's a conversation we'll have going forward.
Absolutely, especially when we're venturing into the general election. So, next question is regarding the CRTC and NFB. So I'll elaborate. In Canada, internet service providers, known as ISPs, generally provide internet service in a neutral manner. Some exceptions, of course, being Bell Canada, Eastlink, Shaw, and Rogers. Now, this notion is known as net neutrality. So the Trudeau government said that net neutrality and cultural diversity are being studied, and the government will avoid a, I quote, protectionist stance that restricts growth and limits opportunities, end of quote. This could mean less power in the future of federal broadcasting regulator for the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, known as CRTC, and a continuing laissez-faire approach to online streaming services. For broadcast stations, the CRTC requires that 60% of yearly productions and a minimum of 50 are produced of Canadian origin. So here's the question. It's a doozy, I know. Do you agree with the Trudeau government stance, and why? And if not, what is the alternative? And we'll start with Jamie once again.
Well, I think we'll probably discuss this in trade, but these issues are also coming up in international trade agreements. And Charlie Angus is definitely on top of digital issues and digital copyright issues. He was the main voice in the House in the past 5 years on this debate. So we do have to look at these complex issues and not take a laissez-faire approach. We need to promote the work of our artists and realize that we're in a different frontier now. The digital age brings different issues, and Charlie Angus, I'm confident that he's on top of these issues and he's ready to answer these questions.
Anthony?
I think there are two issues when we're talking about net neutrality. There's the issue, as Eddy mentioned, of culture. And when it comes to culture, I think Canada has a rich history, especially with the CBC and Radio-Canada, of putting our culture out there, and I think that those measures should remain. The other issue in net neutrality, though, is this is something that's being discussed as well in the United States right now, is giving corporations the ability to actually essentially bribe internet providers to have their content prioritized. Now that I don't think should be allowed, and I don't think any justification of the promotion of Canadian culture could justify that. Now, I don't know what the positions of the candidates are, but that would be my personal feeling.
Well, I think, to bring it back to the trade issue, and now that NAFTA is being renegotiated, we saw that part of the result of NAFTA was that our manufacturing sector got gutted. And so now that the fact that we're in this digital age where companies exist on the internet, and we're building up, Canada's starting to build strength in terms of its digital presence. We don't want to see the same thing happen again to this burgeoning industry. And Charlie's right on top of that. He needs to be there in the House right now arguing these issues because it's happening right now. This is being renegotiated right now, and if there's not someone to speak up for these issues and to protect our Canadian industry that's starting to grow, then we might face a gutting of our industry as we saw in the 90s to the manufacturing industry in Canada.
I would say that, NAFTA it's a huge issue. We need to be protecting our workers. We need to be protecting our industries as well. Like with the NAFTA agreement early on, it killed any job growth that we had in Canada. It killed our industries. Also, I would point out before when we were talking about net neutrality that I'm in agreement that we should be making sure that we don't have our speeds throttled like what happened in the United States, where now corporations can essentially, as Anthony pointed out, that they could essentially bribe corporation like other content providers such as Netflix for higher speeds, and that's something that we can't have. It affects mostly the people in rural sectors where they're not going to have the speeds that we have in the cities, like 100 megabytes per second. They're going to have maybe 10 megabytes per second, and that's something that's an issue.
And Anthony, do you agree with your fellow panelists here?
Yeah, I just want to come back to what Jamie said about trade. The Trudeau Liberal government have shown, I think, tentatively some signs of promise on the renegotiations. I mean, they were talking about renegotiating Section 11 or Chapter 11, which allows corporations to sue governments if they regulate. However, let's look at who's around the table. Negotiators appointed by Donald Trump, Brian Mulroney, and other Liberal MPs. Does anyone really believe that those people have the interests of ordinary Canadians at heart? I think that's a rhetorical question. So this is an important issue going forward.
To which the answer to your rhetorical question is pretty evident. When we come back, we'll be discussing about the economy and taxes right after this.